like, yeah, only Ajinkya, Raviram, like you guys can keep it on during your part.
Is there any audio disturbance from my side? Is there any background noise?
No, it's all good.
So,
Yeah, I think
when
we're
should I
live.
start? Like now, or you are giving any signal?
You can start now. We're live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ajinkya, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Alumni Talk on PhD in Data Science. We are thrilled to have Vishakh Padmakumar, an alumni of NITK, as our speaker today. He is from the IT 2020 18 batch of NITK, and he was convener of ACM NITK. He has done masters from NYU, and he is currently pursuing PhD in data science from NYU. Vishak brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, having worked on various data science projects during his time at NYU and during his internship at Microsoft and Amazon. He will be sharing his insights on the value of pursuing PhD in data science, as well as what to expect during the program and how to succeed in this exciting field. Whether you are considering a PhD in data science or simply want to learn more about this field, this webinar is sure to provide valuable information and inspiration. It's great to have you here, Vishak. So grab your coffee and let's get started. Over to you, Vishak.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Let me just share my screen. Hang on. Uh, cool. Okay, we're visible now, right, Ajinkya?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Vishakh, and yeah, like Ajinkya had just mentioned, currently I'm a PhD student at the NYU Center for Data Science, and during my PhD, I kind of study this rough direction of like how can we better assist like writers perform creative writing tasks, and like generally in this area, I look to answer open questions in the like niche of like NLP and human computer interaction. This might seem, yeah, a little high level, but in this talk, I'm essentially going to talk about kind of my experience passing through basically from NITK to right now and when I'm a PhD student. And then hopefully we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a PhD student currently. And then finally, I think there's some audience Q&A as well. Um, and yeah, before I start, I think this is perhaps the most important slide in the talk, which is that there's no one single story that you can that will perfectly fit your own. I used to make the mistake where I would go to talks like this when I was at NITK, and I try to put myself exactly to follow the path that somebody else followed, but there's nobody's individual circumstances matches exactly another. So try to take from this the certain pieces that best fits yourself and like hopefully benefit from that. Also, this is a model generated image, so I encourage you to check it out. But yeah, like Ajinkya mentioned, so after high school, I was faced with a similar choice like you guys, where, okay, I got some branch of engineering in IIT, but honestly, to me, at the point, more interesting was to study like computer science or IT at NITK. So I joined NITK in 2018, and yeah, I don't need to tell this to all of you, but some of my fondest memories and my closest friends are from my time at NITK. But I think more usefully for me, what NITK provided was a platform to experience a vast variety of different things. So I knew I was interested in computer science, and I was actually part of CSI as it was then, and it became ACM. And through that, I remember doing like different projects and stuff. And I remember my first big dream in computer science was to be a game developer. And like we had this Android program that you could do through Google through CSI. And I remember we built our first apps and kind of moved from there. NITK was also useful because you had time on your hands. And I remember I picked up writing as a hobby during NITK. And like, actually, I even interned with a startup where I was doing content writing for them. And like, that was an experience in itself in my second year. And yeah, lastly, sort of the more traditional, I also got a chance to do a research intern in IIT Madras. I think this would have been in 2016. And this was my first experience being part of a lab and what it meant contributing to research projects. it was also my first experience with a failed research project. So take with that what you will. And yeah, I was also fortunate enough that like during the campus recruitment season, I had a software engineering internship at Microsoft. And like at Microsoft, you kind of learn sort of working on more hands-on what kind of products people are using and how do you contribute in this one cog of an entire team. And I think most importantly, the lessons I take from NITK were twofold. And the first was that like the importance of having a good peer group and the people that you surround yourself with can significantly change like what your story goes from there. I remember I was very lucky to have a very like proactive project team throughout the whole of my undergrad. And yeah, you can take these how seriously as you'd like, right? But like my friends push me to like do these projects with interest and take this stuff seriously and pursue it in the way that interests us. And I think that's something which helps me until today. And also, I think I really benefited from the point of view of, okay, I'm interested in this particular thing. How do you take some steps to examine whether you're seriously interested in it or just a hobby? Like, for example, with content writing, I quickly discovered that like writing on a schedule was not something that would like be very comfortable for me. So I quickly realized that this might not be the ideal career option. So I think the ability to sort of see, okay, how valid is this as a career path for me, and to explore that was something I'm super grateful for at NITK. And at the end of it, I was faced with the choice some of you guys, especially final years, would be faced right now with pretty much standard options, I guess. And I think very quickly I decided that like a PhD was perhaps, I did not have the depth of knowledge or perhaps expertise to pursue a PhD immediately. So I think I didn't really consider that at the time. My first actual conference submission came from my undergrad final project. And this was after the time where you submit your applications for these programs. So at the time, I think a PhD was something that I thought was a bridge too far. But I knew I did like research from my experiences, both doing my final project and other stuff, as well as my experience at IIT Madras. So I did consider an MS perhaps as a gateway through to the PhD, and like maybe as a way to build my expertise in an area and try to identify what niche I would want to work on. I was lucky enough to have this industry option as well. I think at the time, this was a coin flip decision. And I remember I chose the master's mainly because at the time, I saw it as okay, I could come back to industry at the time. Whether I would still make that decision, I think that I don't know. But I think at this point, the key thing to know is just I know people who have kind of reached the PhD stage through any permutation and combination of all of these. Some people go from industry to PhD, bachelor's to PhD, and like any of these like options works exactly fine. But what I chose, kind of, I was fortunate, of course, to get selected to the MS in CS program at NYU. And this was another like big change for me. It was the first time I was living abroad and stuff. And again, I was very fortunate to have a very diverse set of experiences there. Perhaps most fortunately for me, the master's programs are super expensive, right? And NYU exactly isn't the most friendly when it comes to student funding. But through a various set of circumstances, I actually got an RA at the Center for Social Media and Politics. And while I was at CSMAP, I actually got to work with a diverse team of people with vastly different backgrounds. And I learned kind of how you contribute your own skills to this broader project idea. And I got to work on NLP and computer vision on like very real world problems, such as tracking misinformation on social media sites like Reddit and Facebook. And I think this was very important because I got to see the whole like research paper cycle from like what is your hypothesis that you're testing? How do you see this through to experiments? And finally, like how do you write and present this to the community? And like some of the like my most important writing experience, early writing experience probably came from this RA, which of course they were also there's also the point that they financially supported me during my masters, which is a big like load off your head when you're doing a graduate program. Another thing I kind of discovered in the US is often like how one experience leads to another. And I definitely, when I started the master's program, I wasn't ready for how intense the kind of job search and intern search would be during the graduate program. But I was lucky enough that like some of my like coworkers at CSMAP referred me to a startup called Layer AI. And I think I was one of the like very early employees, but as an intern, I was able to kind of build an application in NLP directly for their product and kind of see it all the way from start to finish. And there I kind of got the experience which was different from software engineering at Microsoft, where here you basically own the entire thing on your own, and like nobody kind of gives you direction on how to proceed with this. You have a deliverable, and like how you work to achieve that is kind of up to you. So it was a different experience from both working in like big tech as well as working in like a research lab. And I think that was super valuable for me. And obviously, perhaps the most important, I actually got to work with my current advisor when I wrote my master's thesis. And this was my first work in sort of core NLP. And this was also my first conference submission in NLP, which ended up being a paper on unsupervised document summarization. That might be detailed, but essentially, you can think of it as that how do you select sort of relevant content from within a long document in a manner where you're not, where you don't have labels as to what counts as important and not important. And yeah, so at this point, I've kind of like experienced the three things, which I was lucky enough to do both startups. I could work with like big tech as well as like research. And I think at this point, this was in 2020. This was also when the pandemic was starting. And like we had this choice of like industry versus PhD. And this was perhaps a much harder choice because so the jobs, definitely, like I mentioned earlier, the job search during graduate programs was really hard for me. So having secured like an industry offer, it's really hard to walk away from. And the flip side of that is that so in the PhD, I was lucky enough that I already knew my advisor and I knew the lab environment from during my master's thesis research. So I kind of knew what I was walking into. And at this point, I kind of knew that I could do what like I could do the job of like research and like being a PhD student. So I think at the time, what finally made the decision for me was I kind of viewed the PhD as a job in itself. I kind of viewed it as my first job, and like I viewed it as maybe a more open-ended job that I would work on for a few years and then maybe kind of get back to things. But yeah, this was definitely like a super hard decision. And again, I know people that have done the industry and then come back to academia route, but I mean, this was just kind of the factor that helped me make that decision. And yeah, so since then, I've been a PhD student at NYU through the pandemic and beyond. And what I really liked, and like ultimately, perhaps the most important decision of like doing a PhD was that, like I mentioned, I viewed it as a job where I could choose my own niche of work. And I think that was super valuable because perhaps the gist of a PhD, and I'll probably come back to this in the next section, is that you decide what you want to work on. And like I was able to work in this direction of assisting people doing writing tasks. So you might remember that like I like in my undergrad, and even since now, I still like enjoy writing. So I found this to be something that resonated a lot with me. And like you often have to ask the question, not just okay, I want to do a PhD, but why is this topic particularly interesting to me? Because all of the motivation to work when you're a grad student comes from within you. So you need to be like sufficiently motivated on your own to be to know that you can both make contributions and that you'll be like motivated in this area for a while. So I think this was really good for me because it matched sort of my hobbies and my interests with my line of work. And yeah, obviously, like it presented itself at the right time. I kind of knew the lab and I knew what I was going into. Of course, I'm not really going to talk about my projects, but yeah, some examples are linked here. I don't know exactly if this gets shared, but yeah, I'm happy to pass this on. So that was kind of, yeah, like a 10-minute version of like NITK and before to like right now. The next thing I was asked to speak about was my PhD experience itself. And I was kind of confused about how to do this. Luckily for me, when I asked Ankit, yeah, I guess the con of this, he sent me this wall of text with a vast number of questions that you guys want me to answer. Of course, maybe I might not get into all of these, but what I did was I grouped some of these into different aspects of the PhD, and I'm gonna answer these in sequence. Also, like yeah, Ajinkya, Raviram, at any point, yeah, feel free to like interrupt me from here on. It's kind of just QA. I have some listed, and yeah, I'm happy to like take extra questions as well. Cool. Yeah. So, sort of the first, I guess, kind of batch of questions was more in the early stages of PhD. And, like, yeah, I think the first is, yeah, basically what is a PhD? So, in the very broad view of things, a PhD at the end of it is one, a certification that you're an expert in your field, and two, it's also a documentation of the original and novel contributions you make to this field. And I think this is what something that I had misunderstood earlier. It's not just you want to do generic research. You kind of need to know an area well enough to, scope out what is your niche within that and how you're going to make contributions there. So within NLP, I kind of work in the niche of like HCI plus NLP, and within that, I answer research questions. Of course, this is again subjective. Some people kind of figure it out as they go along. For me, it was also very important to know this going ahead because it gives you a little bit more certainty of what you might be working on. As to how technically advanced it is compared to an MS or a BTech, I actually think there's a little bit of a difference between a PhD program and these programs, because when you're doing a BTech or an MS, almost the what you're optimizing for is like courses doing well in studies and like what is the next step. I think this is certainly one way you can look at the PhD, but because of the length, I prefer to think of a PhD kind of more from the job point of view. I get to work on these problems that I care about, and how I'm judged is not necessarily like kind of executing or like doing certain assignments a certain way, but like in transforming sort of my ideas into these concrete like findings and like presenting this to the community. So I kind of, rather than, I wouldn't necessarily say it's technically advanced. I mean, yeah, maybe you could say that, but like I definitely think some of the courses you take in grad school in an MS are super hard. But like I think the main thing that you're optimizing for is like how do you make an impact in your area, and I think that's what really sets apart a PhD from these programs. Yeah, 5 years is a long commitment. Did I consider alternatives? I think I maybe spoke about this already, so I won't dwell too long on questions 3 and 4. Yes, it is a long time commitment, and yeah, I definitely count myself as super fortunate that like in my 20s I'm in a position where I don't have any outside commitments that let me pursue this for a certain number of years. And I know that like obviously there's many decisions that like come into play to for that to be possible, like getting the RA during my master's degree, and all of these definitely affected my decision. But I think at the time, given the options that were in front of me, I kind of viewed it as okay, 5 years well spent kind of on my own, thinking of like ideas and like putting ideas into execution. And I think at the time, the 5 year commitment wasn't too big a factor for me, but I can totally understand that like people have other pressures and like other factors that they need to consider when, yeah, and maybe this is something we can revisit like in like later QA. Yeah. The area of focus in my PhD is, yeah, pretty much, I mean, thus far, it's the mixture of human AI collaboration and text generation, which is thus far manifested in how do I help people do creative writing tasks. And a concrete example, recently I presented some work where, so if you take the task of poetry writing, this might be pretty hard for like an average person to do. So we, through certain tricks, we found out a way to train a model that would help people write better poetry. And then we actually conduct the user study as well. So this is where sort of the human computer interaction comes in, where we actually conduct live user studies with real users and we see how they write differently with and without machine help. And I think, yeah, this is just my niche. Again, this is something during the course of your PhD, this might change. I think my advisor has a really good line where she says that your research interests might change, but your research tastes don't, which is basically that what interests me about this problem is that we're kind of solving real world problems for real users using machine learning tools. And I think that's the core that I'm solving. So like while creative writing is the niche that I've looked at so far, I think this can the subject matter of what you're going to study beyond that can change as you go through your PhD, because like, yeah, I guess like you guys know, it's a super long time. Yeah, so this was the batch of questions, which is just like, how do you decide to start? What is a PhD and stuff? And the second batch of questions was kind of like, what is PhD life like? Okay. Yeah, so the month, the year, and the life of a PhD student. So much work. But yeah, I think once you start the PhD program, you finish your courses reasonably early on, and then you have like qualifiers and stuff. And then you work more on the research cycle rather than like a month or a year or a semester cycle. So basically, when you're working on a project, you're always looking at what's the next deadline that I can submit this to, because like it or not, we're judged on publications. And you're working on these sort of 6 to 8 month publication cycles. And maybe this doesn't always work, right? Maybe you're not optimizing for like publications. You're working on more general grants. But I think the month and year in the life of a student, I think the big difference is, I mean, yes, you care a little bit about like the semesters because it gives you time to go home and stuff, but like largely you're working on the research cycle. And the what I appreciate about the PhD is kind of it gives you the freedom to choose when you want to work and not. So around your deadlines, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You can maybe you can some people work like all days and all weekends for like 4 weeks in a row and then take a long weekend off. Other people, like what I prefer to do is that I have like a very normal day-to-day schedule, and like I try to like I try to make time on weekends for other things. But you're basically given this freedom to pursue your research the way you want it around these deadlines that you work with. So it's the onus is put on you on like how you should be productive and like how you want to pursue your own goals. What do I like about a PhD? It's basically that, right? Like I really like translating these ideas into like findings. I know some people think this is just like pedantic and like, yeah, what is a paper really? But um the idea that you can take a piece of information or a hypothesis, verify it experimentally, and like put that into writing, I really like that. And there's also elements of like what I liked in writing earlier that still manifest in a PhD, of like putting your ideas out there. And I think generally, sort of the freedom as well as like, what, getting the chance to work the way you will is what I like about a PhD. What do you not like? This is harder. And like, yeah, I guess what's hard about a PhD is it's very hard to judge. Like it's very hard to know like how well you're doing, like before or after. You don't really get many signals other than like paper acceptances, and that's not really a good metric because there's a lot of variance there. But like you often don't know how well you're doing, and you don't get much active feedback, I think. That's perhaps one thing. And like I know like my friends in industry, they get like regular quarterly like updates on how they're doing, what they should be doing better. It's, yeah, you work with your advisor for some of this, but it's a lot more tenuous when you're a PhD student, I think, which I mean, not that I have a suggestion to improve it, but yeah, that's there. What keeps you motivated? Wow, really hard questions. But um I think fundamentally I like what keeps me motivated is just tying back to like the fact that I'm getting the chance to work on something that I care about, and like I choose what I want to work on. I think that's a very privileged position to be in. And I, just take a step back to think about that from time to time, and it really keeps me motivated. But it's really hard because sometimes you're working very long hours, and like when you're doing research, there's an imbalance where just spending more time doesn't get you results. So motivation is definitely a challenging problem, and like having a good peer group, having a good support circle is definitely important. But yeah, I would say uh, having the freedom to work on a particular thing, and like your investment in the field and the findings of your work is what you should kind of be relying on. But yeah, having a good friend circle, having like hobbies that you can switch off on, all of these I think are super important to helping you recharge and stay motivated. um, yeah. Okay. So, how do you manage time, and what keeps you busy other than my degree? I might have briefly mentioned this earlier. But as to how I manage time, what I found works for me is almost like boringly a very regular schedule. Like I'm often in the university at like 8 or 9 in the morning every day, and like I stay till the end of the day. And at the end of the day, I usually like, whatever, workout, football, whatever your hobbies are. And I found that like having the regular schedule helps me regulate both. Like it prevents you from like like overworking, and also like it helps you plan your day better. And I feel like having a regular schedule and having especially when you're working on these sort of uncertain problems that you're doing in open research, having like knowing what your next 2 days looks like is often very nice to know. And like, I would say I schedule my time very rigorously. What keeps me busy? I mean, I keep picking up hobbies. I read a lot of books. I occasionally still write, although my friends will tell you that not as much. And I think the good thing is because you have the freedom, I still have the time to pursue other hobbies like football or like, cooking or anything else. And I know that actually this is something that a lot of students do, where you actually pick up new hobbies during your degree. And that's something which is, I mean, maybe you can see that as an advantage, but that's that. Various sources that you learn from during your PhD. Oh, I see. Okay. So I guess this is kind of thinking about like where does the information come from? And this is one of the hard things because, well, you everything in your area should be what you learn from. And this is any number of papers, which is super hard to read. So like figuring out the right sources of information, these largely tend to be papers or blogs written by researchers. Recently, like Twitter is kind of taking over this as well. But essentially where all are the different ways your community is publishing work. Right now, this seems to be a mixture of Twitter, Mastodon is the new thing, and like also, yeah, mostly research papers, I would say. As the clubs, internships, projects, I think this is a little different, right? Because in a PhD, you're often learning for yourself, and you speak with your advisor, and like both of you have individual expertise, and you sort of put these together. You also speak to lab mates. You try to talk to as many researchers as you can. But networking is very different, and I would actually say for me, it's a lot harder than in college, because in college you're in this siloed environment where you know everything, like you know like who to talk to about internships, clubs, and everything. One of the challenges I found in PhD is often like, yeah, how to get the right information. Very open problem. If anyone has suggestions, please let me know. 22. Do I stay in hostels or independently, and adjusting, managing that alongside a degree? Okay. Yeah, I think some students do stay in grad housing. I stay independently. I think generally you prefer to stay independently, and like it tends to work like a job in that sense. I feel like generally you would tend to manage these things. You'll be fine. Like yeah, you have all these chores and like adjusting to kind of life outside hostel, but um yeah, by and large, I feel like this is a smaller concern. And like I often think that when you're put in an environment like this, you can often adapt to, yeah, how it is to do certain chores, and like you'll figure out what works best for you. And yeah, some people like to stay on grad housing very close to campus. Yeah, I feel like this is a little bit open. I will say I stay independently. I like it a lot, but yeah, that's yeah. I think you can draw your own conclusions. And yeah, these are the harder questions of like what happens kind of after. What are internships like during a PhD? I think these vary a lot. I think when you're doing a PhD, ideally what you want is an internship to add to your knowledge or expertise in your own area. Ideally, you want the perfect match where what you're doing during an internship also adds to your degree. And I think this is very different from other programs where in other programs, when you do internships, you're often optimizing, okay, what's the best job I can do during the internship to secure a job or something. And obviously, like during a PhD as well, when you're doing an internship, you do care about like getting like return offers and all of this. But I think ideally you want to always be aggregating knowledge closer to your dissertation. And yeah, this is subjective. Some people think about this differently. I have had the like fortune, I've done two internships during my PhD. I got to work both at like AWS and at Alexa. These were semi related, I think, to what I end up working on during my degree, but I don't necessarily think there's a perfect optimization function. I will say that like in my internships, the goal has often been to produce like a research paper at the end of it. So both in terms of like how you're recruited for an intern, as well as like what are the outcomes you're evaluated on, tend to be different. And this is very hard. And like actually I think like internships during a PhD, because it's a very short time, it's actually pretty hard to manage this from like start to finish in that. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, wide variance. And yeah, that's my experience so far. My plans after a PhD, I have no plans, but yeah, I so this is very hard to answer, and I think yeah, quite yeah, I will say I don't necessarily know what I do next. I think the positive thing about a PhD is that it leaves open the option of going into academia. And I think if you wanted to go into academia, you can, it's pretty much, I think, if not the only route to go there. I think right now my motivation is still to keep doing research. I don't know in what form that is. And if you are going into industry, actually now I will say that like a PhD is not the only, or maybe not even the best route to do industrial research after a PhD. I know a lot of friends who directly went to work after both bachelors and like masters, who are doing like really good work as research scientists there. So I think just the goal of like doing yeah, I don't think the degree necessarily is the only way to end up doing industrial research. My plans, I have no idea. Let's hopefully talk after 2 years about that. Yeah, how will the PhD help you? Oh no, I have to answer that now. Okay. Yeah, so okay, I will say that like one of the good things about a PhD is that the goal is for you to become an independent researcher in your area. So the idea is that after you finish your degree, you should be compatible to either be an individual contributor in industry or move into academia. So I think what you learn in PhD, and like what I said earlier of like uh being kind of like certified as an expert in your area, as well as knowing your contributions in that area, and in this process you develop the critical thinking skills to become an independent contributor. I will say that the PhD is not the only way to do this. And yeah, alternative paths, like I mentioned, I do know some friends who are working as research scientists and applied scientists in industry directly after graduate degrees. And I think that's it's entirely like um, a valid option now, and which is great. Like more people, yeah, could be working there, which is nice. I will say that, yeah, just the idea of like becoming independent in that sense was, yeah, partly I guess what I view as maybe helping me achieve my plans. I don't think I answered that question well, but yeah, I guess we'll move on. Other common exits for PhD students, yeah, so I spoke, a lot of people go into industrial research or this, people even, yeah, I mean, I know friends who even just go into like industry and work as engineers. I know people who do startups. I think the common exits tend to be industrial research or like a postdoc or further into academia. But I will say that, like, I think a lot of people go in very different directions. And actually, like, yeah, a lot of researchers these days are having startups, which is kind of exciting. And yeah, common misnomer I'd like to clear up. I think this is maybe something that I spoke about earlier, where I don't really view the PhD as a gateway to another thing immediately. Like, I view the PhD as a goal in itself of like, I want to do research in this kind of subfield, and like, I want to have certain contributions in this area. So maybe that's a misnomer, I don't know, but like, yeah, I don't necessarily view this as a degree to the next thing, and like, maybe that's slightly different. Maybe that's also not universal, by the way. This is just like my opinion of things. And one thing I will just want to like point out, I think some students try to get into the PhD program with the eye of like leaving midway with a master's degree. Personally, I don't, I mean, of course, yeah, up to you, entirely your own choice, but I necessarily don't think that's the right way to do it, because you kind of burn a little goodwill if you go that route. And in my experience, it's often been that like, wherever you are, if you do a really good job, it usually leads to something else after that. So the idea of like letting go of something midway, personally, that doesn't exactly sit well with me. Of course, I know that there are other circumstances, and I know that like I'm in a very like privileged position to say this, but yeah, I guess that's something maybe I'd like to clear up. But yeah, maybe you guys can give me suggestions on that as well. Advice for anyone in college considering a PhD. Okay, I'll actually answer this in the sense more that like, what would I have maybe done better during my undergrad? Because so one, I think you guys are doing spectacular. Like now when I look at like my NITK advisors lab, like a lot more like papers, conferences, workshops, it's great. Like generally the like, I think you guys are much better equipped to pursue graduate studies and like PhDs immediately after undergrad than I was. I will say that one thing I wish I had done earlier was to get into the culture of like reading papers and like getting up to date on an area. Like I think this was something. So at NITK, I was often optimizing for like project, or like how do I do this particular project in a certain way. Maybe sort of systematically building like some knowledge of a field might have been a little bit more helpful. And I know this is hard, right? Like it's really hard in an undergrad, first off, to like know what you want to be working on, and also, yeah. But I think generally, advice in like high air quotes, but yeah, maybe systematically like reading a bunch of important papers and like relevant papers in an area, and yeah, building knowledge in a bottom up fashion rather than what do I need to complete this project. 24. What has my PhD taught me beyond my degree? I have no yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's mainly just I think it has influenced a lot of the way so when I read books differently now. It's influenced kind of my tastes. I'm always looking, oh, what are people doing that's interesting, and like stuff like that. And I will say one thing that's also changed like since recent years, I guess, is I really like listening to people talk about what they're passionate about. and you get to experience this often as a PhD, because whenever someone talks to you about their work, it's obviously something they care about a lot. So maybe I feel like I danced around that question, but yeah, I think that's. I was told 30 minutes. I'm a little bit over, but yeah. Open QA also, yeah. Maybe yeah, Ajinkya, anyone, if you guys wanna
Yeah,
maybe yeah take over now.
yeah. Actually, well, that was a very informative talk on the PhD. It indeed created a new perspective towards the doctoral studies. Thank you for sharing your valuable insights. And moving to the Q&A session, our first question is like, what's your perspective on the career counseling? Do you think it would be helpful for the undergrads, especially taking career counseling after their BTech or undergrad?
So yeah, one thing I will caveat here is when I actually didn't know what career counseling was, and I found out about it about 5 minutes before the talk. So perhaps I don't think I'm the best person to answer this question. See, I think the goal of your career counseling is to best prepare you for graduate studies and stuff. For me, definitely what helped more, so I did not yeah, I was, yeah, maybe, yeah, didn't really follow through with the career counseling. And I will say that, like, the reason you do that is maybe you might not know as much about the graduate program as such. But for me, I definitely learned a lot more from my immediate seniors, like +1 and +2 years from me in NITK. Like, you get to see like how what paths they progress on, and talking to them, for me, yeah, I was the belligerent junior who would ask a lot of annoying questions. So I think I don't want to offer an
Yeah.
opinion like whether or not to do career counseling, but yeah, I think,
Okay.
yeah, do whatever you'd
Yeah,
like.
that was actually
Strong. Yeah.
a basic question from most of the candidates. How to choose the next career option after the undergrad and all.
Yeah.
So, moving to the next question, what is the thing which you regret doing at NITK and not doing it at NITK? Like you wish I would have done it at NITK while I
Yeah,
was
I
there.
think I think this is something I spoke about earlier. Like, I think at NITK I was often optimizing at the project level. Okay, how do I complete this project in a certain way? I think building up knowledge of like a field as a whole by reading like a regulated set of papers or like a reading list. I think that is something I could have done. Yeah. What I might change if I go back. But honestly, so I don't want to frame this as like a regret, because yeah, I think in my experience there's like so many different ways where you end up doing research that, like, there's no, oh, it's too late or something like that. I think it's, yeah, I feel like regret is a very strong word. That's about it. But yeah.
Okay. And going to the next question, for people who are interested in PhD, what would you suggest to more focus on the projects or the LORs or SOPs?
uh So I think the focus should be on, like, I mean, of course, this is again, like, there's many different routes you could go for this, but personally I think like what you're judged on often is just like the quality of like getting your work out there and like publishing at like workshops and conferences and talking to people. And usually your LORs come like along with that. So basically try to see, when you do a project, try to see, okay, is there a venue where I can go present this and like talk to people about it? And yeah, I would say, okay, this is advice. I would, yeah, try to optimize for like getting a tangible goal for your projects. And yeah, you'd hope the LORs come along the way. Yeah, typically I'm not the fan of like, oh, working with person A to get LOR. I think that's, I mean, of course, like if the route works for you, fair enough. But yeah, I feel like optimizing towards doing higher quality work is, in my opinion, maybe the better route. But yeah, of course, super subjective.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
have a
great. And
question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is the most exciting project you have worked on during your time at NYU or your internship?
Exciting, I would definitely say, is like my most recent work, where so there we worked on collaborative poetry writing. And like I think this was interesting for me because this is something I do in my free time. So training like machine learning models to help people do this, I was really like, I bought into the motivation from the start. And then we were able to like actually like conduct a real user study and see like how people found our system helpful or not helpful. So yeah, It's a paper. Yeah, maybe yeah, just message me. I'll send you the link. But yeah, it's called co-poet,
That's great.
poetry writing. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And what's your take on doing pursuing PhD right after BTech?
I would not have been in the position, like I don't think that was an option for me. Like I don't think I had the relevant expertise and like also like just the like skills and like also yeah how I don't think it was an option for me. I think a lot of people do it. It's very common these days, but like yeah, I think that's not what you don't optimize to do the PhD as fast as possible. I think you kind of want to see, okay, what are you really interested in, and like what is the next step to get there. For me, that was sort of through the master's program. I think if you know what your interests are in, if you know that you're qualified, I know a lot of like undergrads these days are publishing conference level papers and stuff. I think if you're qualified, then like definitely getting into research earlier is better. But I want to caveat that by saying the other thing where like you can always go through any route to do a PhD. It's mainly like, yeah, think of it as wanting to make contributions and like how do you optimize towards that. And yeah, I feel like I'm dancing around that question, but yeah, I guess that's my
Hmm,
answer.
yeah, and you have actually done a PhD in data science. You are actually pursuing it. How is the data science in the coming era? How is it going to influence the coming era? Like, what are its major applications?
Okay.
What is
I
yeah.
see. Yeah. So one, I think like data science is a very broad umbrella. So like yeah, very hard to solve. But like so often I think when you do a PhD, you're judged more on the quantity, like on your dissertation itself. So like what are you making contributions in rather than like the name data science. So that's one point. The second point of I think what's really exciting about like machine learning right now is that so for a few years, like people were solving data sets like how do you get a certain score or something on this data set, which is fine, which is fair enough. But now people are using like deep learning and machine learning models to solve very real problems, like what I said earlier of like how can we help like an actual user do a certain thing better. And I think this the idea of like solving more real world problems and like making the kind of your other tasks easier through like data science, I think that's going to be something which people are going to care about for a while. And I think it's already happening. Like I'm sure all of you know this already, but yeah, does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah, I think I answered that.
yeah, it's well answered. And uh, actually, what are all the expenses that can be managed by the stipend provider? It is sufficient enough.
Yeah, so I think at NYU, which is my only experience, both like so I had experience both as a master student as a PhD student getting like a stipend. Generally, your stipend covers, at least for us, it covers your living costs entirely, and you can save a little bit each month. I will say that like I know this is very subjective, right? Like I have no external commitments, like I'm not like paying back a student loan or something. So I think for me it covers my day-to-day expenses and I end up like saving a little bit each month. But this is of course, yeah, it depends entirely on your lifestyle, I would say.
Yeah.
But actually,
What
this
are the
is
prominent?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. But I think that's a really good question to consider when you're applying to grad school. Because so this varies a lot between different programs, and this information is actually public. So if you have like external commitments, I think it's definitely something you should consider when you're applying, because you don't want to be put in a like in a position of financial pressure during your PhD, because as it is you're under a lot of pressure. So I think making that's a very good question. So whoever asked that, like kudos to you.
Uh, what are the domains other than DS which you found exciting to pursue PhD in? What are the hot areas right now to pursue a PhD?
uh I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this, but so I think you should, yeah, like personally I would say you don't want to be like you don't optimize to do a PhD in like what is hot. Like you think what is like what would you be genuinely like interested in and passionate about. That's the ideal case. To answer the question directly, I think that there's a lot of cool work happening in like graphics, a lot of cool work happening in security, IoT, sensing, all of this stuff. I think, yeah, like it's more the question of like
Yeah,
Technology
it's
is
more what
advancing.
you're.
All of these, like robotics, all of this is making advances, right? Generally, in a PhD, you find your niche within your area. So, yeah, as to the hot or not, I listed a few keywords, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, is that what you're looking for? I'm not sure. What's the.
Yeah, it's actually based more on interest rather than what's currently running.
Yeah,
And
I think
actually,
that's.
yeah, what are the factors one should consider to decide the career option, like whether going to job or MS or PhD, MTech? Like many students are confused what to take as a career option and when to start their work towards that.
Right. And this is hard. Like I would say I still don't necessarily know for myself as well. Like, right, what's the next steps and all. So I mean, there's a few like unavoidable factors, which are, of course, like what is your family situation, what's your financial situation, all of these, which definitely affect your choices at the time. And like, definitely, like, there's no, like, yeah, I don't think there's a set path that you should follow. I think for me, the difference of like, so I'll only say like specifically for PhD, but like having that freedom to like kind of move my ideas to like a documented format in the form of research was helpful. I know like for others they try to optimize for like more broader impact and like yeah, either with a startup or with a company where you work with this huge user base and like there your optimization is more for like what is this product I'm building and like how do I change the most lives in the world and stuff like that. So I think it's yeah, the optimization for PhD is kind of how do I kind of make a contribution in this area. um yeah, my small contribution in this small corner of this area. And I think yeah, but this is definitely I think what you guys are doing really well is I saw that you have like speakers from very different like backgrounds. I think talk to people, see why they're doing what they're doing, and then see if that's something you're interested in or not, because definitely like doing a PhD if you're not interested in research is not something I would recommend.
Well, yeah. So, how does a day go at NYU? You have been spending during the masters and PhD. How was your experience different from masters and PhD there?
I mean, that's very different, right? Like masters, you have courses and stuff to do, whereas PhD. So I think the difference is just that, like in a course, you kind of know the optimization, right? Like you know, okay, to get my degree, I need to do this, 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 and this, and I'm also looking for internships. I'm also looking at jobs, and I will say that, like during masters, I was not prepared for how stressful like the job search would be, because when you graduate, you have a very short time to like find a job, right? So that's actually very very stressful. And maybe if I was looking back right now, uh, I actually think some of the students who came for a master's after getting some work experience, they were much better suited to this job search than I was. And I think yeah, as a master student it was often like okay, how do I get like yeah, finish my courses, finish my projects, get done with it, and also looking for like the next internship or the next job. For the PhD it's often okay, these are the open projects that I'm working on, how do I make progress on a certain like these while optimizing to this like sort of long term like research deadline goal. Does that make sense? Yeah, I feel like these are very different.
And tell us how a day goes at NYU. Like, how do you spend a day at NYU? When does it start? How
I
does it
mean,
end?
right now my day at NYU usually starts pretty early. I mean, yeah, the good thing is this is entirely up to you, but I'm usually in the office by like 8:30. And yeah, so during the day, so it's usually you're in some part of the research process. So either you're reading papers or you're thinking about ideas, whiteboarding with like your friends or your advisor, or you're already in the stage where you're contributing to a project and you're seeing, okay, what's the best next thing that you can do in this project, which is a different kind of thinking. So I will say like so my day usually is like from 8:30 in the morning till like 6 7 in the night. But honestly, yeah, like close to deadlines you work very late hours and stuff. I will say I try to reserve like 6 to 8 in the evening for like my own hobbies and stuff. Like it could be either like working out or running or something. But yeah, it tends to be like a normal work day. Like yeah, I hope that gives you an idea. But yeah, this is very different. Some
Okay.
students work from like 1 p.m. till like 4 a.m. and stuff. This is it's up to you. As long as you can deliver on your research goals and your own ideas, I think that's fine. How you schedule your time.
Yeah. I guess that's the end of the questions actually. Anybody has anything to ask? You can.
No, I think
Yeah, I have a question.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, how was your experience during internship at Microsoft and Amazon?
Microsoft was great. So I was actually interning in Lovely Mansion in Bangalore, which was awesome. So there at Microsoft, we walked into the project. It was a software engineering intern where we kind of had this loose goal of like what we want to achieve, and then what you were tested on is how you can implement this within the kind of team's existing code base and stuff. So you're contributing to this bigger like product, and like you have this fixed goal that you're pushing towards. And I think that was, I had a great experience. I'm still in touch with like some of the like people from there. Like in fact, when I was doing master's job search, some of my like my manager from Microsoft from my bachelor's intern actually helped me out a lot, which was very helpful. So I think it was great to like talk to people and like yeah, the good thing about Microsoft was everything was sort of well defined what you're going towards. At Amazon, so I was doing a research intern at Amazon. It was slightly different where it's kind of uh the team that I was assigned, like that I was recruited into, is interested in this broad area of like work, and I'm interested in this other space. And like we basically had to brainstorm quickly, come up with a project that's in the intersection of both these interests, and then move from like that sort of area of interest to like a paper. So the during the Amazon interns, I was like we were always looking, okay, how do you make a contribution in this research space? Whereas Microsoft, it's just how do we contribute to the product in a certain way. But I will say that like this is not universal. Like when you do research interns, sometimes you do come into the point where like it's well set and like you just execute the project, and like that works for some. Yeah, like it's entirely like open, and yeah, depend. There's pros and cons to both of these, but yeah, I think that makes sense.
That's nice. I have one more question. Just before some day, ChatGPT was released, and what are your thoughts about it?
I mean, it's great, right? Like ultimately, like it's a model which has. I mean, I don't want to maybe go into too much specifics, but it's a really good model, and this is an instance of what I said that like I think the difference from now versus like let's say 5 or 6 years ago is that these models are really really good. Like objectively, models can do I'd say about like 85 to 90% of traditional tasks already, which is so you can look at this as a pro or a con. And the way I choose to view it is okay, yeah, let's think about like how we can use stuff like ChatGPT to solve like real problems, and like then you benchmark and you evaluate how these air quotes good models are at doing the real tasks, and then you find out where they're actually weak and stuff. And I think there's the view of it is just that as the models get better, maybe the like space that you can work on is less, but I would actually say that that's limited only by your creativity, and like it opens up newer better questions. Like 5 years ago nobody would have thought that it would be possible to like work on collaborative poetry writing, but now models are good enough to do this. ChatGPT can do this like probably off the shelf, but like it just makes you think about what are the contributions that you're making. And like yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, I knew someone would ask me about ChatGPT, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like magic. Yeah, I have used it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the questions are over now, and we can wrap up the meet.
Great.
Thank you, Vishak, for joining us and spending your time.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really great interaction.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Happy to chat.